The shuttle descended through the thick yellow clouds of Pandora 7, its hull creaking slightly as it broke atmosphere. Inside, students from 6 different planets sat strapped in their seats, their diverse eyes, some black and round, others slit like a snake's, some glowing like bioluminescent pearls, fixed on their instructor, standing at the front console. Professor Thanos towered over them, angular and imposing, his skin glimmering with metallic undertones. His 3 eyes blinked in perfect unison as he addressed the class. "Today," he said, his voice resonating like an underwater drum, "you will be stripped of your comforts. No neural implants, no plasma tools, no inteligência artificial companions. You will survive as primitives. Your task is simple: build a fire." Gasps rippled through the cabin. A squid-like student from Vela made a squatching noise of protest. A winged girl from the sky colonies of Verith clicked her beak nervously. Only one student remained still: Nova, a human girl from Earth. She adjusted her strap and waited without speaking, having already learned that humans rarely needed to say much to make an impression at the Galactic Academy. Actions traveled farther than words out here. As the shuttle settled into the clearing and the ramp lowered with a hiss, Professor Thanos stepped onto the loamy ground and gestured broadly. "This is your arena," he said, his triple gaze slowly scanning the group. "Each of you will find a space within this clearing. You have access only to natural resources. Nothing else. You'll be evaluated not only on success, but on creativity and efficiency. Begin." Nova slung her small canvas bag over her shoulder and stepped off the ramp without a word. She moved to the edge of the clearing and knelt beside a cluster of dry brush, scanning for kindling. She didn't rush, simply observed, watching where shadows fell, where sunlight broke through trees, where wind curled leaves against rocks. Nearby, Thor, the reptilian boy from Asgard 3, hissed loudly as he scraped together 2 sharp stones, grinding them so violently that sparks flew into his scaly hand. "Useless rocks," he muttered, his tongue flicking in frustration. Behind him, Diana, the winged Amazonian girl, tried flapping her wings hard enough to create friction with 2 pieces of bark. It produced little more than tired feathers and annoyed gasps. Further down, Banner, the gelatinous student from the methane oceans of Wakanda, squished into a shallow puddle, surrounding a pile of leaves with his translucent body. Steam rose faintly, but no fire caught. He was trying to simulate pressure and heat using his own biology, but moisture ruined everything. Nova watched them briefly, then looked away. She had seen this on the station when her classmates depended too heavily on technology, panicking when their wrist devices glitched or the food printer went offline. Most had never held a real stick, let alone tried to ignite one. To them, fire was a button or setting. To her, it was the flick of a match, the glint of glass, the focusing of light. She dropped to one knee and sorted through the ground cover. The bark was damp, but under a fallen tree she found dry moss, curled and pale gold, perfect tinder. She set it aside with brittle twigs, then reached into her jacket pocket. Her fingers closed around the frame of her old eyeglasses, the kind her grandfather had insisted she carry even after her vision was corrected. "You never know when you'll need to see things a little differently," he always said. She wiped the lenses on her shirt and inspected them for scratches. Though slightly smudged, they were clear enough. She adjusted the hinges, looked up at the sun breaking through the canopy, and moved toward the brightest patch of earth where her small fire pit, just a ring of stones with a hollow center, waited ready. Behind her, arguments erupted. "You must be cheating," Thor shouted at Banner, who burbled defensively. "There's moisture in the air," Diana groaned, slapping her palm against her beak. "It's sabotage." Professor Thanos said nothing, standing at the chaos's center with arms crossed, watching. Nova crouched over her pit, holding the eyeglasses steadily between the sun and the moss. It took only a moment to find the right angle. A thin, hot beam formed instantly, focusing into a tight that glowed on the dry fuzz. Within seconds, the moss blackened, curled, and a wisp of smoke rose like a question mark. "Nova Chen explosive, blowing gently." The smoke grew. A spark flared into orange, then caught the twigs with a tiny pop. Flames danced upward, licking at the air with eager tongues. Nova smiled. Her grandfather would have been proud. Around the clearing, the smell of smoke turned heads. Thor twisted around, jaw slack. What? How did she? Diana fluttered in place, hovering above the ground before dropping awkwardly beside the fire. That's not allowed. She's using tech. It's not tech, Nova said calmly. It's glass. Just glass. Banner slithered forward, his eyes bobbing in surprise. She used the light, the star fire through curved crystal. Nova didn't reply. She just fed another twig into the flame. Professor Thanos moved toward her fire, his cloak brushing leaves as he stepped. He looked at the fire, then at the eyeglasses, and finally at Nova. He didn't speak, but his nod was slow and deliberate. Others gathered closer, their frustration fading into reluctant curiosity. Diana crouched beside Nova, studying the moss, the arrangement, the airflow. Thor folded his arms and huffed, but didn't look away. The flame crackled and grew, casting flickering shadows across alien faces. The first lesson settled into the clearing. Not in the professor's booming voice, but in the soft pop of bark and quiet triumph of heat. Nova leaned back slightly, brushing soot from her fingers. She knew the test was far from over, but already the flame had taught enough. The fire crackled as Nova quietly added a thicker branch. The energy in the clearing had shifted from frantic desperation to a mix of quiet shame, competitive envy, and internal recalibration. Thor stood alone, his wide frame casting a jagged shadow across the ferns. He sharpened new stones against each other, his slit pupils narrowed, tongue flicking in and out like a metronome. His earlier failure gnawed at him visibly. He came from a race that prided itself on primal strength, descendants of desert predators who survived for weeks in wastelands. Fire should have been elemental to his nature, yet he hadn't produced even a spark. Banner remained by the water's edge, his gelatinous body gently rippling in concentration. He'd stopped trying to generate heat internally and now attempted to use sunlight refracted through one of his species' natural crystal droplets secreted from his inner membrane. The sunlight shimmered beautifully through the crystal, casting rainbow fragments across wet moss. But beauty didn't equal ignition, and Banner began to sag. Diana paced restlessly, wings twitching, her sharp claws clicking against rocks as she muttered under her breath. Known for agility and precision in flight, none of that helped her now. With a short grunt, she began arranging feathers and dry ferns into a makeshift nest, creating friction with her wing claw against a stick. Nothing but a faint squeak echoed back. Meanwhile, the twins from Atlantis, Stark and Vision, spent the last hour constructing a bizarre contraption from seaweed-like tendrils and a metallic ring apparently scavenged from shuttle storage. Stark insisted it was a solar concentrator modeled after ancient Earth telescopes. Vision kept adjusting the angle obsessively, rotating the base with his webbed toes. The device collapsed twice, splashing muddy leaves everywhere. Professor Thanos remained absolutely still, his triple gaze taking in every motion, every stumble, every adjustment without comment or assistance. Without external feedback, students had no sense of progress, only the burning silence of expectations unmet. Hours passed. Frustration bloomed like fungus across the clearing. Thor snarled and threw a sharpened stone into a tree trunk. It embedded with a satisfying thunk, but satisfaction was fleeting. He looked at his calloused hands, now scraped raw, and the cold pile of twigs at his feet, exhaling a slow, venomous hiss. Banner slowly lifted himself off the soggy patch, his gelatinous structure holding its form with visible strain. He repositioned his crystal droplet with trembling care, but it cracked under his own weight and dissolved into the damp soil. He stared at the ground as if betrayed. Diana lost patience next. She snapped a stick, flung it into the underbrush, and stood rigid before stomping toward the professor. "This test is biased," she shouted, pointing at Nova's thriving fire. "We weren't told humans had an advantage." She brought glass. She used a focusing lens. "That's advanced Earth knowledge." "You were told," Professor Thanos said calmly, "to use what nature provided and what you carry." Diana hesitated. "I carry claws," she said, lifting a wing. Banner carries biothermal fluid. Thor has stones. She has glass. How is that primitive? Nova, adjusting rocks around her fire pit, finally turned. My glass isn't artificial, she said without rising. I wear it like your feathers or his claws. It's not technology. It's a tool. Diana stared, her pupils tightening to thin slits. The professor stepped forward. The difference is not in the tools. It is in the perspective. Diana returned to her area without another word. Thor, emboldened by her challenge and driven by burning pride, tried one last desperate method. He crushed dried leaves into powder, muttering ancient war chants. He struck flint-like stones together, hoping to ignite the powder in a burst. Smoke hissed from a pile, then fizzled. He punched the ground in fury, claws digging deep into soil as evening shadows stretched across the clearing and twin moons rose. Most students had gathered their failed tools into solemn piles. Even the most stubborn accepted defeat. The clearing was littered with burned-out leaves, snapped twigs, and contraptions half swallowed by moss. Only Nova's fire still burned, surrounded by carefully arranged wood, fed intermittently, but never allowed to die. She sat beside it with knees drawn up, watching flames flicker toward the stars. She wasn't gloating or smiling. She simply existed beside the warmth, as if fire was something ancient that recognized her. Banner approached slowly and sat a few feet away, his body folding into a small puddle, eyes glinting with what might have been admiration or exhaustion. Thor stayed where he was, silent and alone in the dark, watching the fire with a tense jaw. Professor Thanos surveyed the scene once more. Day 1 is complete, he announced. 1 succeeded, several learned, none are excused. Tomorrow you will build shelters. With that, he disappeared into shadows. Nova didn't move. She added one last piece of bark to the fire. As its light danced across her face, her eyes caught Thor's from across the clearing. She didn't speak, but he didn't look away, and the fire, ancient and steady, kept burning. Nova awoke before the others as pale blue moonlight filtered through the canopy. Her fire had burned down to glowing embers, and early air was damp with dew. She stretched, muscles aching from the cold ground, but her mind clear. The silence felt thick but wasn't entirely still. Low hisses and soft groans rose from alien students beginning to stir. She moved to the stream curving behind camp, splashed cold water on her face, and drank handful. The chill bit into her hands, but she welcomed it. Returning to her area, she saw Thor sitting on a large root, hunched over something in his lap, a jagged piece of bark he carved with a sharpened claw. When he noticed her, he neither looked away nor acknowledged her. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between irritation and begrudging interest. By sunrise, casting golden and orange streaks across trees. Everyone gathered in the clearing center. Professor Thanos emerged from mist like a wraith, his 3 eyes sweeping the group before speaking. Today your test is structure, shelter, protection. The elements on this moon are unstable. Construct a safe haven by nightfall capable of resisting heat, damp, and predators. Use materials you find. You may observe others, but mimicry will be penalized. Survive, learn, begin. Nova didn't wait. She scanned for fallen branches, her plan already forming. Not just a tent or hut, but something insulated, breathable, and hidden. She gathered long sticks and thinner vines, sorting them by flexibility and thickness, working with precision and checking each component carefully. Others scattered quickly. Stark and Vision slithered toward large fern clusters. Diana shot into the air, wings slicing through branches, seeking elevation. Thor stalked into deeper brush without a word. Banner melted over a sun-warmed boulder, absorbing energy before beginning. Nova crouched and began weaving bendable vines into a crossframe, tying joints with fibrous strands peeled from inner bark. Her fingers moved quickly, instinctively, her focus absolute. Her father had taken her camping in the Rocky Mountains, showing her how to build lean-tos and ground shelters with only what they carried. She remembered night air smells, fire flickering behind nylon tarp, and his pride when she tied her first tension knot. Hours passed. Sweat rolled down her back, arms aching from pulling wood into position, but her frame held firm. She pressed large leaves against the outer layer, adding vines to secure them. not beautiful, but heat-retaining and breathable. Across the clearing, Diana built in trees, tethering thick branches between three strong limbs, now fanning wings to dry them for a suspended nest. It looked elegant but flawed, shifting under pressure and trembling with every wind gust. Still, she worked on, pride as strong as ambition. Thor reappeared late afternoon carrying huge armfuls of leaves and mud. He stomped through underbrush and dropped his load onto flat stones, then layered mud thickly over branches, smashing it down with fists. His shelter would be heavy, opaque, defensive, a shell rather than home. Banner worked differently, shaping his body into a wide dome, carefully supporting layers of leaves and sticks on a surface like molding skin. His method was slow, deliberate, almost meditative, forming structure from inside out. As sunlight faded, Professor Thanos returned to inspect each construction. At Stark and Vision's partially submerged dome, he ran his hand across the glistening surface before moving on without comment. He hovered beside Thor's shelter longer. The mud coating had hardened under sun, but wide cracks formed where branches pushed against the dried surface. The professor tapped the edge once, and a flake fell free. Thor stiffened but remained silent. Diana's treetop shelter, he levitated silently, brushing one joint. A rope snapped, causing a third of the nest to sag dangerously. Diana opened her beak but didn't speak, her wings twitching as she looked away. Finally, he reached Nova's structure but didn't touch it. His three eyes blinked slowly in ripple formation across his forehead. Her frame was narrow but sound, walls layered in leafy shingles angled to shed moisture, entrance low to conserve heat, with a shallow trench around it to redirect water. "This will hold," he announced loud enough for all to hear. Nova exhaled softly and sat beside her shelter. Her body was sore, hands bruised, but the word sufficed. As night fell and cool winds returned, she crawled inside and curled against the leafy wall. The warmth held longer this time, air thick but breathable. Her fingers traced tied knots, feeling tension in vines. Outside, something howled distantly, guttural and lonely, answered by another closer, sharper call. Something large and heavy moved through brush, but never entered the clearing. The students slept with one eye open. Nova did not. Her fire had taught her to begin. Her shelter had shown her how to endure. She rested with one hand on the pouch, holding her glasses, letting sleep take her fully. Tomorrow would be harder, and she would be ready. Morning arrived with pale mist drifting across the clearing like visible whispers. Nova stirred beneath her layered walls, back aching from uneven ground, but the air inside remained warm and dry. Outside, Diana descended from her tree with short flaps and quick hops, claws scraping bark. Thor stood with stiff posture and crossed arms. His mud-covered shelter looked misshapen in the fog. Stark and Vision sat cross-legged beside their pond dome, whispering sharply. Banner stretched his gelatinous limbs, slowly re-solidifying as morning light filtered through. Nova knelt by her fire pit and began rebuilding. Same stones, same location, but reshaped for longevity. She worked purposefully but unhurriedly, placing each piece deliberately with the assurance of someone who understood fire as rhythm rather than mere reaction. Professor Thanos arrived as fog thinned, gliding silently over roots. He moved from shelter to shelter, inspecting with eyes that never blinked simultaneously. At Nova Station, he watched her strike glass once more, the curved lens catching light. Within seconds, smoke curled upward from moss. She leaned forward, gave it breath, and flame bloomed with obedient heat. The professor remained still, then with subtle head incline, walked away. Thor watched from distance, eyes narrowing, turning a flat stone over repeatedly as if summoning forgotten technique. His shelter had failed to retain warmth overnight, leaving him sleepless. Pride had curdled into resentment toward Nova, not for her success, but her calmness. She moved without hesitation, spoke only when necessary, and succeeded with quiet that burned his chest. The professor gathered everyone near the clearing center. "You have fire, you have shelter. Now, sustain yourselves." He gestured to surrounding forest. "This moon contains edible resources, Fruits, roots, insects. Some are toxic, some fatal. Use instinct. Use observation. Use each other. You have until dusk. Then we eat. He faded into mist silently. Students dispersed after brief hesitation. Stark and Vision darted toward wetlands. Diana flew low through trees, scanning for fruit clusters. Banner slid into underbrush with tidal patience. Nova remained by her flame, watching it crackle quietly. She placed small flat stones around the edge to warm them, and set a metal cup with gathered water in the center. While others hunted, she planned. She entered the forest with light feet, carrying only a slightly sharpened curved stick. Her eyes missed nothing. Leaf veins, insect paths, sap color from broken twigs. She tested ground with each step, scanning for patterns. Half an hour later, she found an herb with thin waxy leaves and purple flower clusters. She bent low, sniffed the stem, and snapped it gently, releasing strong minty scent. She smiled and tucked it into her pouch. Nearby, moss shimmered with dew. She knelt and scraped a portion into a folded leaf bundle. Further in, she spotted Diana crouched near thick roots, pulling small round berries. She looked up at Nova's approach, but didn't speak, her feathers ruffled and beak smeared with greenish pulp. They taste sharp, Diana muttered. Might be safe. Nova took one, rolled it between fingers, then split it with her fingernail. Inside, the juice was pale and viscous. She smelled it, pressed a tiny drop to her inner wrist, then moved on after a few seconds. Thor emerged from the clearing's far side hours later with bloodied claw and gutted lizard-like creature slung over his shoulder, its tail streaking dirt. He dropped it near his shelter with a grunt and began cleaning it with sharpened rock, carving through sinew with aggressive, practiced strokes. Nova watched him build a crude spit and impale meat over flame. The smell was harsh iron and oil, undeniably food. She returned to her fire and unwrapped her findings. Her stones were warm now, water bubbling gently. She added crushed leaves and stirred, releasing minty citrus scent. After cautious taste, she nodded and set it aside. By dusk, the clearing had transformed. Small fires burned at various corners. Stark and Vision boiled pond plants into gelatinous soup. Diana roasted tubers smelling like burned garlic. Banner glowed faintly with satisfaction after absorbing sugars from fermented fruits. Thor sat beside his fire, chewing with audible crunches, eyes locked on the group. Nova placed polished stones into a flat leaf and poured tea into a second cup, offering it to anyone willing to approach. No one moved immediately, but Diana glanced her way more than once as darkness fell. Professor Thanos returned, moving slowly between fires, inspecting silently. He paused longest beside Thor, continued past the twins and Diana, then stopped at Nova's side. He looked at the teacup, the warmed stones, and the herb bundle beside her.